that pisses me off, right, is those majoring in the minors. You know what I'm talking about. The guy who you've never seen squat, never seen deadlift. Well, of course you see him bench because everybody bench, but they don't do any power cleans, power snatchers, or big compound movement. They basically, the whole workout is based on those little minor tweaks, isolation exercises, 5 variation of curls, 8 different variation of cable crossovers. Just, you see the type, right? Normally they're like 145 pounds, wearing a tank top saying beast mode on or something like that. That just pisses me off. I mean, of course, I do use a lot of isolation work in some phases. But you have to understand that prior to that, I trained for 6 years for Olympic weightlifting. And before that, I trained for 10 years for American football. The first 16 years of my life were spent doing only the big compound movement. And ask anybody who built a thick, strong, powerful physique, they all focus on getting strong on the big basic movement patterns before even thinking about throwing in a ton of isolation work. I mean, I'm not talking against isolation work, but it's only a tool you use to fix a weak point. But how can you know if you have a weak point if you have not built any of your strong points, right? If you're 135 pounds soaking wet, you have all weak points. You have no strong points. Just do the big basics, and what will happen is as you get stronger on the big basic lifts, you will naturally see which muscles are your naturally dominant muscle. I mean, if you're doing squats, deadlift, bench press, overhead press, rowing movement, and a vertical pull movement, you will hit every single muscle in your body to some extent. Now, those muscles who don't respond as much as the others from those big basic lifts are your weak points. Muscles that you have a harder time involving in the big basic lifts. Because when you do the big basic lifts, your body will always have the tendency of using the muscle that are the strongest, the best to do the job. So of course, the muscles that are left underdeveloped are those who don't respond as well to training, either from a muscular or neurological standpoint. Now, if you've done that for a few years, you've discovered, well, that muscle just doesn't respond as well as the others. Well, then you will include isolation work for that muscle to be able, first of all, to load it properly, but also to build the mind-muscle connection so it can better be integrated when you do the big compound lift. Okay? I'm not saying you cannot build muscle mass from the isolation work. I'm just saying it's highly inefficient. Okay? Now, start with the exercises that give you the best bang for your buck. And as you discover that you have some muscle that lack direct stimulation, you can add a little bit of work for those muscles. There's nowhere that is written that you need isolation work for every single muscle group. Now, I'm quads super dominant. I don't need to do any isolation for quads. I can just do squats and they grow fine, okay? I'm shoulder dominant. I need very little isolation exercise to work my delts. But my biceps are bad responders. So if I want to maximize their growth, heavy rowing, heavy chin-ups won't do the trick for me. But for some people, it's enough. I had a client who had huge arms, never needed to do any type of curls. Isolation work is only added to a program to fix a problem that the big lifts cannot fix, okay? That's the only reason. Isolation exercise are not your program. A program should never be designed around isolation exercise. Isolation exercises are a way to fix a problem. But how can you know if you have a problem if you've not built your body to a level that's high enough to see the difference between your strengths and weaknesses? You can't. Get big and strong on the big basics, then you can do the minor stuff, but only to fix the lagging muscle groups. I mean, the body has a limited capacity to adapt, okay? Especially if you're a natural trainee. So it doesn't make sense to spend training money on exercises that have a very little return. It's better to invest that money on the big basics, and whatever you have left, you invest to fix your weak points. Analogy time. If you have a house, okay? If you have a house, well, you have a certain amount of money to spend. Or let's say, not just the house, just regular life. You have a certain amount of money to spend. You have to pay for food, you have to pay for your apartment, you have to pay your car payments, you have to pay for any other like very important stuff. So you have to take care of that first, right? Don't spend that money on a trip to Vegas, on prostitutes, on drugs. You can do that stuff when don't do that stuff, except maybe going to Vegas, okay? You can do that stuff, but only when you've taken care of what's important first. But I actually see some people spending tons of money on cars, on TVs, and then they freak out because they don't have enough money to pay for their credit card, for their house, for their food, for their children. Training is the same way. Spend your money on what's important. And if you have enough money left, energy to recover, you can spend a little bit on minor stuff. Or you can keep it in the bank and invest that energy on recovery and growing. The message here is, it's simple. I'm not against isolation. In some cases, isolation work, minor stuff is important to fix a weak point, for example. But it is not mandatory. You only use it when it's needed. It's never the cornerstone of a program. If your program needs to have more than 4-5 exercises in a session, you probably need to review your quality as a programmer. Okay? Focus on the big basics. They will reveal your weakness. Then use isolation only when needed to fix those weaknesses.